Hello, in today's video I'll be covering how to check your engine oil and how to properly read a dipstick. I know many of you who may have already watched my oil change videos may already know how, but I'll be doing a more in-depth video on this very important step, including how to locate the dipstick on a variety of cars, many different oil result examples, and also a few dipsticks that may look different and in turn be confusing. So first thing you'll want to do is have the engine off and parked. The longer it's been sitting, the better. This will give the engine oil enough time to drip back down into the engine's oil pan and give you a more accurate result. Because as the engine's running, oil is being pumped through the oil pump, which pumps it throughout the internals, so they're properly lubricated and avoid premature wear. So when you shut the car off, all this oil begins to drip back down into your oil pan. So waiting anywhere from 10 minutes or more, I say is a good time to wait. Now that we've waited and it's sat for a while, we'll want to find the dipstick. Normally this dipstick will be located near your engine's oil fill cap, and the dipstick will have a brightly colored handle. Like these, for example, have yellow or orange, which make them easier to find. While this black one with the white writing might not be as easy to locate, but once you do, the process of checking the oil will be pretty much the same. In case you do wonder what kind of oil should you use if your car is actually low after checking your oil, many oil caps will have it printed on the cap itself, as this one does, showing a 5W30 oil. The brand of oil isn't as important as the viscosity is. If it's low, it's better to have oil up to the proper level than to leave it low and avoid adding it because of a preferred brand. If you look closely, many engine oil dipsticks will have it printed on the handle itself, so if you ever feel unsure if you're checking the proper dipstick, you may also want to look for this. Before you do remove the dipstick, you'll want to make sure to have a clean rag or a towel handy, as you will be using this to wipe off the dipstick. The reason for this being, if you notice the dipstick is covered in oil, and that is from all the oil that's been splashing around as the engine was running. So now that it's been off and sitting, we wipe off this oil so we can get a proper oil level reading. But before we do that, let's take a look at what we're going to be looking for. Here's what our dipstick will look like. The dipstick has two dots on it, as most will do. The higher one to indicate the full mark, and the lower one to indicate our low mark, with the space in between them to indicate an OK amount. But there's also a secret to these marks. The space between the low and the full mark is approximately 1 quart of oil, so you can use this as a measuring device to tell you how low you may be. Anything at or below this low mark indicates you should add oil. Anywhere here in the middle is considered okay, but I always prefer to have the oil level sit closer to the full mark, as cars do burn oil or can lose oil in a few ways, even more so in higher mileage vehicles, so it always makes me feel safer to have that extra buffer of oil in case the owner never checks the oil. So now let's go ahead and reinsert the dipstick, making sure that it bottoms out so you get an accurate reading. This piece here butts up against the top of the tube, but if you do notice that your dipstick is hard to remove or insert, adding a little oil to this section with the O-ring will help make it easier. Removing the dipstick the second time, we got our engine's oil level, which if we use the low and the full mark as a measurement, it tells me that it lost about 1/4 of a quart of oil in those 2,000 miles, which is not that bad. With this reading, I would not add any oil, because it's closer to the full mark than it is to the low mark. Now if it were anywhere down here, or below the low mark, I would add oil. Now if we notice the color of the oil, it's kind of a mixture between dirty and clean, which is just about right for an oil that's about 2,000 miles. So I wouldn't change the oil yet, since it's a golden brown color, but once it has a darker brown or a black color, it's definitely time for an oil change. And here's a different example of a dipstick. This one has a line to indicate the low mark and a line to indicate a full mark, with the crosshatch section in the middle to indicate an OK level, which is pretty similar. Now on this Honda Accord, it's got a plastic section where you read the oil level, with two lines cut out, the lower line as a low and the higher line to indicate full, and the section in the middle as an OK level. And finally the dipstick to the Cadillac ATS. You got 3 dots and a crosshatched area. This one may look trickier, but it's essentially the same thing. The crosshatched portion indicating an OK level, while every dot being 1/4 of a quart, so the middle dot means it's 1/2 quart from full, the lower dot indicating it's 3/4 of a quart from full, and the upper dot 1/4 of a quart from full. Here I brought up a few examples of what you may come across. This first one, we got an example of an oil level that barely shows up at the tip. You can tell that the oil is really dirty and old, so yes, it needs about 1 quart of oil, and also needs an oil change, so you may as well do an oil change at this point and avoid spending money on a quart of oil. This next example has really dirty oil. Although it is up to the full mark, this one is definitely due for an oil change at this point. If you're familiar with older oil, newer oil does get darker much faster than oil from the past, and that is because newer oils are meant to trap these deposits and contaminants that the filter does not remove, instead of letting them accumulate inside your engine. But the longer you leave dirty oil like this in your engine, the more it'll affect any future oil changes. Essentially, this oil begins to contaminate any future oil changes, so always try and change it before it gets this bad. Here we got clean brand new oil on the dipstick. The problem with new oil is, it can make reading the oil level pretty difficult. From this angle it's not so bad, but sometimes I gotta rotate the dipstick to get a view from the side. It'll look like a bubble where the oil level sits, but anyways, this oil level is about 3/4 of a quart low, so I would at least add about half a quart. For this one we are actually overfilled about half a quart. Anything over half a quart, I would definitely remove some oil, because adding too much oil can also be problematic, depending on how much it's overfilled. The more it is, the worse it can get. It can affect crankcase pressure, cause oil leaks to worsen, misfires, oil pressure problems, and more. So what would I do in this case? Probably remove a little. And this is where I would prefer to have my oil level land, although some prefer just below. Either one is fine. Well anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video and or found it informative. If so, please click that thumbs up button to support my video and my channel. And please subscribe if you haven't done so.